So we're now looking at verse 11. All suffering comes from the wish for your own happiness. Perfect Buddhas are born from the thought to help others. Therefore, exchange your own happiness for the suffering of others. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. So this verse is also about bodhicitta. And there are two main methods for cultivating bodhicitta. One is called a 7-point cause and effect method for developing bodhicitta. So the previous verse, verse 10, is about that, although it doesn't mention all the points, but it starts with remembering that all beings have been our mothers, or rather contemplating that all beings have been our mothers, and then remembering their kindness, how they took care of us with so much kindness, then repaying their kindness, which ideally should arise naturally when we contemplate what they've done for us. And then there's love, loving kindness, compassion, and then the extraordinary intention of deciding we will take on ourselves the responsibility to help all of them be free of suffering and achieve happiness. And then finally, bodhicitta, the culmination of this process, where we decide, I'm going to become a Buddha and help all living beings. And then the second main method for cultivating bodhicitta is called equalizing and exchanging self and others. And this verse, verse 11, is about that one, although again it doesn't mention all the points. But that method has 5 points, and it starts with equalizing self and others. And that involves contemplating ways in which we and everybody else are the same, especially our wish for happiness. Everybody wants happiness, meaning we want our wishes fulfilled, our needs fulfilled. And conversely, we don't want suffering. Nobody wants pain or sickness or to be harmed or mistreated in any way. So everybody wants happiness and nobody wants suffering. So that's a pretty simple idea. But it's really profound and powerful to contemplate that. I find it really, really helpful. It helps to break down any feeling of barrier between oneself and others, and you feel a greater affinity for others and a connectedness with others. And it's also helpful in daily life. For example, if you see somebody who's behaving in a rather strange way, or irritating or annoying way, if you think to yourself, well, this person is basically just like me. They're trying to be happy and they're trying to avoid suffering. And this is their method of finding happiness. You know, they're doing this just to get happy and avoid suffering. And maybe it works for them. It may appear strange to me, but maybe that's, right for them. So that really helps. It helps to avoid criticalness, judgmentalness, negative feelings, and again, just to have the sense of affinity helps to have more compassion and kindness and patience with others. And then the second and third points of this 5-point method are what are talked about in the first 2 lines of this verse. And they involve comparing 2 attitudes, 2 states of mind. One is self-cherishing. It's normally called self-cherishing, although I think a lot of us are moving away from that term and using self-centeredness instead. So that's the attitude of me first. I am the most important person in the universe. Everything revolves around me. I have to get my way all the time, and I don't care about anybody else. So there's, different levels of that, degrees of that, but it's about that attitude. So the second point of the method involves looking at that attitude and, asking ourselves, is this really helpful or not? And hopefully we come to the conclusion that it's not. And so the first line of this verse says, all suffering comes from the wish for your own happiness. And that can be kind of misleading the way it's written, because it can sound as if it's wrong to want happiness. It's wrong to be happy. We shouldn't care about being happy. But that's not the meaning. Okay, in fact, we should be happy. Dalai Lama says this again and again. We should be happy. It's important to be happy. And if you think about it, if we're not happy, how can we make others happy? If we're miserable, depressed, negative, down all the time, then how much good are we going to be for others? Yeah, so it's important to be happy, to be able to continue our Dharma practice, and to be able to give happiness to others and help others. Okay, so it doesn't mean literally that, it's wrong to wish for happiness. But one thing is there's different kinds of happiness, and I'll talk about this later in another time. But, one kind of happiness is just like sensory happiness. It's more what we call pleasure, sense pleasure. Nice sights and sounds and so on. That's the kind of happiness most people are looking for, craving for, and running after. And that's kind of the most low-level form of happiness. There are higher forms of happiness. So one thing is, what kind of happiness are we trying to achieve? Is it just that sensory pleasure? And another thing is our motivation. What is our motivation for seeking happiness? If it's coming from ego, I am the most important person in the universe, which anyway, that sense of I, as we have heard many times, is wrong. We have a wrong conception, a false conception of who we are. We feel that I is a real, solid, permanent, fixed thing inside of us. And that kind of I isn't there, doesn't exist. But most people are, caught up in the belief that such an I exists, and then trying to fulfill that I's wishes and needs and grasping more and more and more and more. So that's the self-centered attitude. So that's really what's being talked about here. And it says all suffering comes from that. So it's good to check this out for ourselves. I'm sure we've all had plenty of experiences in our life where we were caught up in that self-centered attitude and trying to get something for ourselves, even knocking people out of the way in order to get it. So what is the result of that? For yourself, for others? Does it really bring peace and happiness and satisfaction? So it's good to check our own experiences, and hopefully if we do, we'll recognize that, that is not the way to go. That's not the way to get happiness. It just brings more suffering. And especially, this point is mainly talking about how non-virtuous actions like killing, stealing, and so forth, if we look at where they're coming from, it's usually self-centeredness. Like hunters who go out and shoot deer and turkeys and so on. These are our friends, but some people want to go out and kill them. And why is that? Where is that coming from? It's this wish, I like venison, I like turkey meat, I like to eat that. And so just ignoring the fact that these are sentient beings who want to be happy too and don't want to die. So there's self-cherishing that lies behind these kind of non-virtuous actions which cause suffering for others, but also for oneself. They're the cause of suffering in this life, future lives, and keep us in samsara. So anyway, that's a long story, but we don't have time. So that's the second point of the 5-point method. The third point is looking at the opposite state of mind, which is altruism, caring for others, being concerned for others. And the second line of the verse says, perfect Buddhas are born from the thought to help others. So the thought to help others is altruism or compassion or kindness, concern for others. So that is said to be the source of all happiness up to Buddhahood, enlightenment. And again, it's good to check our own experiences, times in our life when we were able to put our own needs and wishes on the back burner, lower priority, and put the needs and wishes of others before ours. And what was the result of that? How did that feel? How did that affect you? How did that affect others? So if we investigate that, again, we'll probably realize, that's much more satisfying. Even if there's temporary discomfort or difficulties, but we feel better about ourselves. And long term, the results are happiness. So that kind of attitude is the cause of good rebirths, happiness in future lives, the realizations of the path, like calm abiding and realization of emptiness, liberation, enlightenment. So all of those good results come from altruism, concern for others. So if we investigate that and then hopefully come to the conclusion it's much better to be altruistic and not self-centered. And that's the fourth point. The fourth of the 5 points is deciding to change. It's called exchanging self for others, but what it really means is deciding that you're going to change your attitude and be less self-centered and more altruistic. And that takes time. We can't do it overnight, but gradually working on it, we can bring about that change. And the fifth point in these 5 points is Tonglen, taking and giving, which is a very powerful method for that purpose of transforming our attitude and being more altruistic and less self-centered. So the last 2 lines of this verse are about that. Therefore, exchange your own happiness for the suffering of others. That's referring to the practice of Tonglen, taking on the suffering of others, giving your happiness to them. So I'm sure you've heard that and practiced that many times. It's a really amazing practice. There's different ways of practicing Tonglen. There's one way that's, I kind of call it on-the-spot Tonglen, because you can do it in your daily life. And it's really helpful. If you're experiencing some problem, let's say you have a headache, or problem with another person. So it's kind of unpleasant and irritating. So if you can remember to do this, you can just think, okay, I'm not the only person in the world who has a problem like this. Lots of other people do. Same kind of problem or similar, even worse. Some people have even worse situation than what I'm experiencing right now. So then you think of others who are suffering as well. And then you think how wonderful it would be if they could be free from this problem. Then the next step is I will accept or endure, go through this problem, this difficulty myself, with the wish that everyone else will be free of theirs. So you can do that just in a couple of minutes in the middle of doing other things, washing dishes or driving your car or whatever. You don't have to sit down and meditate. And it really helps. I mean, the problem may not go away, but it changes your mind, changes your attitude, and it's a way of using the problem to create virtue, to increase your compassion, to increase your altruism, to get closer to enlightenment. So it's very helpful. And it doesn't mean you can't take an aspirin. You can still take an aspirin for your headache or whatever pill you need. But that may not work right away. It may take a couple hours before your headache goes away. So in the meantime, you can do this practice, and at least it alleviates the mental suffering and transforms this situation into something virtuous. Okay, so thank you for listening.